Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome. I'm Peter Gahan. I'm the Acting Deputy Dean here in the Faculty of Business and Economics, and I'd like to welcome you here for this Isaac Symposium. Before I do so, I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung and Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, the traditional owners of the land on which tonight's lecture is taking place, and pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. In doing so, I'd also like to acknowledge the importance of Indigenous knowledge in the Academy as a community of researchers, teachers, professional staff and students. We are privileged to work and learn every day with our Indigenous colleagues and partners. And I extend my respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us here tonight. And it's a big year for this country. There's a referendum that will take place on a very auspicious date, October 14, happens to be my birthday, that particular sort of date. So I've got big aspirations for what it might sort of yield. I'm not going to tell you how to vote by any stretch, but if you haven't read the Uluru Statement from the Heart, then I encourage you to do so. It's a very brief document. It's about 2 pages long, but I think it's an extraordinarily powerful one and a very generous invitation from Indigenous people for us to walk with them towards reconciliation. So please take a look at that statement. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all here for the 2023 Isaac Industrial Relations Symposium. It's been 3 years since we've had the symposium in person, and we're really excited to finally have the opportunity to connect with people again. And I'd like to thank David and Trudy for coming along as members of Joe's family to be part of tonight's lecture. So this symposium, in fact, is hosted jointly with the Faculty of Business and Economics here at the University of Melbourne and the Monash Business School. And that collaboration recognises and highlights the outstanding contribution to industrial relations and labour economics made by the late, great Professor Emeritus Joe Isaac. I had the privilege of knowing Joe on a very personal and professional level. And when I first started working here in February 1990, Joe was then retired as the Deputy President of the AIRC, and he occupied the office next to mine. I was a cocky 20-something whippersnapper. I'd just completed my honours at UNSW in Industrial Relations, and I thought I knew everything until, of course, I met Joe. So despite his success, he was humble and incredibly generous. He was a great mentor and role model to me, and well into his 90s, he could be seen on campus, engaging with students and staff and sharing his diverse knowledge. He was a great lunch companion and always dressed impeccably. My absolute favourite was his dusty blue safari suit. It was a look that I could never have pulled off, but Joe, he looked like a movie star, so glamorous, but so elegantly casual. And I'm forever envious for his ability to do that. He was a University of Melbourne alumni. He completed a BA Honours and a BCom here at the University of Melbourne and a PhD at the London School of Economics. When he came to the University of Melbourne as a student in 1941, his father persuaded him to study accountancy. No judgment there. But after accepting a tutorship in economics here, economics then became his lifelong absorbing interest. He held chairs in economics at both Melbourne and then at Monash University between 1962 and 1974. From 1974 to 1987, he was the Deputy President of the Australian Conciliation and Arbitration Commission. He was in fact the first economist to occupy that key role rather than a lawyer. And Joe was seamlessly able to link the theory and practice of industrial relations, facilitating the combination of economics and law that underpins successful employment and wage regulation in Australia. He also served as president of peak bodies, including the Industrial Relations Society of Victoria, the Economic Society of Australia, and the Academy of Social Sciences here in Australia. He was awarded the Distinguished Fellow Award by the Economic Society in 2016. He was made an Officer of the Order of Australia in 1989 and awarded honorary doctorates at Monash and at Melbourne. So the faculty is absolutely delighted to continue in honouring Joe's achievements through this Industrial Relations Symposium, which was made possible by the generosity of Joe Isaac and his wife Golda. Industrial relations, of course, continues to be a hot topic in Australian politics and industry. For example, the regulatory reform in IR pursued by the Labor government under Albanese, which helps to underscore the relevance of this particular series. In fact, I spent half my day looking at the changes that are about to take place at the end of this year. So it's sort of resonating right across the university sector. So, it's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker for this evening, Professor Martin Behrens. Martin is a senior researcher at the Institute for Economic and Social Research, and I hope I get my German right here, Martin, at the Hans-Boeckler-Foundation in Germany. Thank you. He also teaches sociology at the Heinrich Heine University in Düsseldorf and currently serves as the Deputy President of the Works Council at the Hans-Boeckler-Foundation. Martin was educated at the University of Göttingen, graduating with a master's degree in social economics. He completed his doctoral studies at the School of Industrial and Labour Relations at Cornell University and was awarded his habilitation, that is his postdoctoral professorial qualification, by the University of Göttingen in 2010. Between 2011 and 2020, he was the co-editor of Industrielle Beziehungen, the German Journal of Industrial Relations. I'm sure my German then was a little bit dodgy, but anyway. And he served as an executive member of the International Labour and Employment Relations Association from 2015 to 2021. So Martin has published widely in leading international journals in areas related to work and industrial relations. His current research interests include employee voice, union strategies, employer associations and conflict management at the workplace, with a focus on Germany, as well as from an international comparative perspective. On the topic of tonight's lecture, you can say that Germany has often been considered a model of stable and cooperative industrial relations with its distinctive brand of social partnership between capital and labour, forged from the ruins of World War II. And until more recently, an ongoing source of fascination and sometimes envy for international observers. Yet, Europe's largest economy has not been immune from intensified globalisation and the spread of neoliberalism. And in recent decades, these forces have contributed to considerable tension between stability and change in Germany's industrial relations regime. So we're delighted to hear from Martin, one of Germany's foremost IR experts, about how things are getting on in German IR today. So over to you. Can we please welcome Martin?
Thank you very much, Peter Gehan, for this wonderful introduction, and thank you for the organizing of this workshop, having me here. I'm honored to be the today's speaker in memory of Joe Isaac and in the framework of the Joe Isaac Symposium. I also want to drop one personal note. I was so happy about this invitation for another reason, because not only to visit my co-author and friend Andy Pekarek, but also we are working on a book project. We are going to push forward during this week of my visit here in Melbourne, and this invitation enabled both of us to make progress on that book manuscript. Thank you also for that opportunity. So this is what I'm planning to do in the remaining 35 minutes of my talk. I will first introduce you to a key concept which is at the heart of German labor relations, the dual system. And to give you some impression, if people talk about Germany, they always talk about any kind of dual system. We have one for apprenticeship training, also dual system, and one of how to recycle our waste, which is also dual system. This is something completely different, and I will tell you in more detail what it is all about. Particularly about the synergies and whether they are supplementary institutions. Then, after that, the sad note on this, I will introduce you into the decline, 20 years of decline of that very institutions, and then in the next step, we'll try to explain why is it that these institutions are in decline? Where does it come from? I will then suggest some approaches how these dual system might be strengthened in the future. What needs to be done? What are potential strategies for restabilizing these institutions? And I will end with a few conclusions. But before I start, please allow me a brief overture, as we might call it. Why do we want to study this? Why it is important to look at the dual system? Well, in the major international comparative literature, there's a clear answer to that. And I quote it from a work from Addison, Schnabel, and others on the German model. This dual system is near universally credited with having reduced industrial conflict first, and at the establishment level, and having promoted trust and cooperation. And this inspired scholars throughout the world who thought they might have at least some of those elements. And one of those scholars who was referring to this is actually Joe Isaac. I quote from his 2018 paper where he ends his investigation of what needs to be done with the Australian labor relations system and their institutions. It would be too much to expect the development of the European social partnership model. But a move in that direction would be to the benefits of all concerned. So, picking up on that, we will see in a couple of minutes whether it's worth it to pursue such a strategy. So, I begin now with the first section, trying to explain the dual system. And for a German scholar, it's often really hard to skip on all the details, but I have to, because otherwise forget about the 35 minutes. The first pillar of the dual system is establishment-level works councils, which serve or provide employees with a voice at work. These works councils are to be elected in the private sector only. We have similar, varying institutions in the public sector and also for the churches, which have basically their own labor law. Workers are entitled to elect works councils in establishments with at least 5 employees. They're elected, and this is important in the contrast to system, which, for example, have shop stewards sent by the union, right? Like in many of the Anglo-Saxon countries, it's important they're elected by the entire workforce, not just union members. This is very important. What are they doing, works councils? They have a far variety of different rights depending on the subject fields, for example, rights for information, consultation, or veto rights. However, the strongest rights works councils have are called co-determination rights, which basically mean that the employer needs the consent of the works council to act in these fields, meaning that the employer in these areas can't act unilaterally. So where does it apply to? Well, we're talking about co-determination rights in the field of distribution of working time. Issues of control, including information technology, software, for example, health and safety issues, training, job cuts, and also company restructuring. However, please keep in mind what works councils are not allowed to do is anything related to collective bargaining. Works councils by law are not allowed to bargain on issues like wages, the length of the working week, and general working condition. This is a privilege of unions and employers association, an area I now move to. This is a second pillar of the dual system. Multi-employer collective bargaining. Collective agreements are to be negotiated between labor unions and mostly 8 of the affiliates of the German trade union Peak Confederation, DGB, and one employers association which organize employers in a certain industry or sector. We have about 700 of them involved in collective bargaining. So 8 unions, national unions, meet one of the 700 employers association in the bargaining process, in total producing about 3,000 different wage agreements which are active. We have some national agreements, but most of them apply for the industry and regional level. By law, terms and conditions of those agreements only apply to the members of the associations or organizations which have negotiated and which are party to the agreement, members of the employers association in that field, and union members. However, de facto, employers have a tendency to grant those collectively agreed standards to their entire workforce, and not just union members. The simple rationale is they don't want to provide an incentive to get union members, push them into the union, so they pay all workers the same. We have a second system of single employer bargaining, but it's not that widespread. But it's possible to have single employer agreements. I'm now trying to explain to you how these different pillars work to each other. The major trick is this system helps to reduce conflict at the establishment level. How come? Well, it's doing so by defining two separate arenas with certain assigned actors, laws, and behavioral standards. For example, at the establishment level, so where we do find the works councils and plant management are the key actors. We have unions in the establishment, but not at shop steward, but works councils might be union members on their own, right? At the level above the establishment, we have labor unions and employers association, and in some cases single employers who sign collective agreement after they negotiated them. Establishment level, we have a separate law, the Works Constitution Act, which regulates these issues. At the level above, we have a Collective Bargaining Act. Is one of the eight oldest laws we have in Germany, which has passed even shortly before the Federal Republic of Germany got created. And the Section 9 of the German Constitution, which guarantees the famous concept of collective bargaining autonomy, which basically means that in Germany, employers is not allowed to interfere with collective bargaining first, and second is also required to maintain strength to some degree or support the collective actors, employers association, and unions to grant them their status by law. The key tasks are at the establishment level, the works council level, regulation of certain labor standards at the establishment level, and applying the standards of the collective agreement. They don't negotiate them, but they have to apply them. Unions and employers at the level above are negotiating collective agreements on working wages, hours, and working conditions. Conflict is quite important. As I told you earlier, this system is good for separating areas of conflict and thus enabling the establishment level to have more peaceful, collaborative labor relations between works councils and management. This is true because works councils might exercise some pressure tactics or refuse to cooperate. However, they're not allowed to call a strike. It's forbidden. Works councils can't call a strike. This is a right reserved to unions at the level above the establishment. They can call a strike, warning strike, lockouts, and so on. Finally, picking up on the famous works of Walton and McCarthy, we could summarize that at the establishment level, works councils, it's integrative bargaining. So actors' major goal is to solve problems in mutual collaborations, in trustful collaborations, as the law says. However, distributive bargaining, meaning what we give to the one party can't be distributed to the other, is an issue reserved to the level above the establishment level. This brings us to the summary. So, as you can see, this system relieves works councils from distributional conflict and unions partially from providing for membership service and servicing single member establishments, because German unions rarely have an own presence there at the establishment level. They rely on works councils. Also, this combines different sources of legitimacy. So unions are legitimate as they have members and they sign up and pay dues. Works councils are to be run for election every 4 years. They need a majority in elections among the workforce. That's their source of legitimacy. If I do a bad job as a works council, I'm out of the office in a couple of years. I don't get re-elected. That's it. Simply the problem. Both systems have a different degree of state intervention. The state is supposed to keep his hands off collective bargaining, as the Constitution says. However, the regulations through the Works Constitution Act at the establishment level is quite dense. So, to summarize this and to answer the question I put out there in the title of this section, it's synergies. So both systems are closely intertwined and support each other, reduce conflict in the one area, and relax unions' necessity to service workers. It not just supplements it, where, for example, the one system is making up for the deficiency of the other. It's creating synergies in a sense that is an extra value to it. The nice this looks, we have one problem, and it starts right here. This shows you about the areas which are covered by the dual system, basically putting together information on two things: collective bargaining coverage and coverage by the establishment level works councils. And you can see the reddish shaped part of the pie and the yellow part of the pie. This is basically where the full size dual system applies. It's just 30%. So it's a minority thing. Then we have another area, the purple, blue, and gray bars, where you have only one part of the system, either collective bargaining or works councils, but not both at a time. So it's an asymmetrical thing, which is also close to 30%, and then more than 40% don't have anything. And this is, by the way, mostly small and medium-sized establishments where you rarely have collective bargaining coverage and rarely have works councils. I shortly introduce you into the sad story about the development in the last 20 years. As you can see here, this is a coverage by works councils. This is the first time we have this kind of time series data in 1996, and leading us to 2021. The blue bar is basically the share of the workforce covered by a works council in West Germany. And the lower bar line is the share of workers covered by the Works Council in East Germany. This is important because with the German unification in 1919, something remarkable happened. Besides, the wall came down, which is remarkable already, right? The remarkable thing, it's a natural experiment where a society tried to transfer an entire set of institutions from one part of the country to the other. So from one day to the other, East Germany had West German works councils and exactly the same law we have in West. They had West German unions and employers association. The problem is they had a hard time to build deep roots for one reason, because the conditions were different. For example, in 1990, when the wall came down, it was so hard to build employers associations, which are crucial to have collective bargaining. There isn't any major multi-employer agreement if you don't have an employers association, right? So, and at the time when most of the economy was still owned by the state, why should you have employers associations? So it took almost forever to bring them in, and it didn't work that well. So by and large, we lost, as you can see, from 51% coverage in the West to 39 in 2021, more than 10% coverage rate in that time. Even worse, The situation in the field of collective bargaining coverage, which in West Germany came down from 72% in 1996 to 45% in 2021. So as you can see, we have a slowly declining spread of those key institutions, which of course is a reason to major concern. What is driving the decline? Because before you can reverse it, you need to understand what is driving it, right? So here are some suggestions. And again, there is not the one and only reason which can be accounted for that decline. I think there is a multiple combination of different reasons. And here are some of the hottest candidates for that. The first one is increasing competition on European first and on global markets. Keep in mind that at this time frame, when we observed the decline of key institutions, we had a massive enlargement of the European Union, which came along with free movement of labor and capital. So basically meaning that we all of a sudden had countries in the side where workers could freely move with much lower labor standards and wages. So companies moved, for example, to Poland, Hungary, the Czech Republic, and built production capacities or purchase their supplier products from there, which increased significant pressure on the German labor market and again also on the key institutions. Second, we also observed that unions got increasingly weakened. We had a union density in Germany of 36% in 85, which was about the key peak of density we had in Germany, to 16% in 2019. I already told you about the German unification and its impact. To some degree, the institutions didn't build deep roots there. To another degree also, it used as the testing ground, for example, for decentralization of collective bargaining. And after employers in some areas like the metal and engineering industry tried it out there, they transferred some of these experiments to the West. We had certainly an impact of a strong and growing service sector. There's nothing wrong with services, even knowing that the German economy is traditionally strongly based on manufacturing, which is given high union density and well-paid jobs. However, the service sector had a problem building a close relation to works councils and collective bargaining coverage because it's dominated by small and medium-sized facilities. So if we have industrial relations, one key variable in almost any regression, which gets significant and has impact its company size, and this is playing out here quite dramatically. Okay, then it's not just something like tendency, structural changes. We also had issues of strategic choice of key actors. And the most daunting issue is that employers in the early 1990s decided to introduce a new so-called bargaining-free, or in German, OT, membership status. Basically meaning originally employer associations are built solely to enter bargaining with the union. That was helped to create them. All of a sudden, some associations changed their bylaws so that they allow membership, but excluded these companies from coverage by the agreement they had signed with the unions. So why should employers become member then? Well, employers association offer really excellent services in terms of advice in labor and employment law. They even represent their members in court cases, right? So if an employer wants to benefit from these services but is not interested in being covered by the agreement, he or she can now do so, right, and choose an OT status, which had a tremendous impact. So far, the leading employers' confederation, Gesamtmetall, about 50% of their member companies, mostly the smaller one, okay, are signed in with the OT bargaining-free membership. So it's dramatically. And finally, also, while employers in Germany are mostly happy with works councils, in all surveys, some of them even go that far saying, I don't want to do without the works councils. Those who don't refuse to accept an election. And we have some conflict on the first time election of works councils, which some observers remind to union busting strategy in the United States. What needs to be done? What can be done? Well, with a little help of my friends, maybe. One argument is that the state might help to stabilize this system. But as I told you earlier on, well, in Germany it's a shaky thing because we have this famous concept of collective bargaining autonomy, which is built into the constitution, which keeps the state from too far interfere with collective bargaining. And also we had, when it comes to state involvement, an interesting alliance between some industrial unions who are against it, conservative or free market parties in the government, as well as employers' associations who said, don't do it. And this was one of the key reasons why it took Germany until the year 2015, so quite recently, to introduce a statutory minimum wage. We didn't have it before. And part of the reason is because also major unions thought it interferes with their bargaining rights, right? So this changed to some degree, but you can see that this is kind of German voluntarism where major actors in society are not easy with state involvement. However, if you look around in Europe, and this is a wonderful chart. I love it because it has two important pieces of information in one chart. Tells you a bit why it's important to have state involvement to stabilize collective bargaining. The colors tell you a bit whether these countries apply laws for the extension of collective bargaining. These laws provide that by state decree or decree of the Federal Secretary of Labor, standards, collectively agreed standards can be extended or applied to areas which are not directly covered because an employer is not member to an association or because there's not a sufficient union presence. So by decree, this can be extended to these areas. And so we have these laws, and they are applied widely in countries as diverse as Spain, France, Italy, Austria, and Finland. We have laws in other countries as well. However, they are rarely used or seldom used. And we have countries and former member countries of the EU which don't have them at all. And if you look at Germany, this is interesting. We have some regulation which allows for the extension of collective agreements. However, it's quite limited. So if you now compare it to the numbers which are printed in the countries, you can see the reason why we have high bargaining coverage, for example, in Spain, in France, in Austria, or Italy, it's mainly because of the extension of collective agreement. So observers argue, why don't we have it as well? We come to back later. So I now suggest, and coming to my last round here, suggest a few strategies what might help and to enable the dual system to survive. How can we strengthen it? 3 approaches. First is stabilizing from within the system, so taking advantage of its strongest positions and features, a top-down approach as well as a bottom-up approach. So hopefully this makes you already curious to learn more about that. We start from within. Why this might be a successful strategy, I think it comes out this statement of the president of the German Employers' Peak Confederation, who at the peak of the Ukraine war crisis said, well, we have always been good at dealing with crisis. And it's not just blah, blah, blah. He thinks it's serious because he feels that the dual system of labor relations in Germany actually is an advantage in making the German economy fit for pressures and a crisis like this. Just to make this point here, I brought some data to you. This is the first major crisis we had. It's the world financial crisis, right? After the Lehman crash. And we did in my institute, at WSI, a survey of about 2,000 works counselors. And we asked them, okay, has your management often interfered with works council legal rights, which is a proxy for massive conflict if German employers don't obey the law to push the works councils out? At the time, shortly before this survey was done in spring 2007, before the Lehman crash built up speed, 13.9% of the respondents, Works Council, said, yeah, our employer interfere with our legal rights. So in 2010, when the crisis was cooling off, this came down to 10.2%. As you can see, employers cherish this system of workplace-level representation as a tool to solve problems. So they put behind potential conflict they have, and works councils and employers together work on a strategy to save the establishment and to safeguard employment, right? This is their mission, and they do so, and then push conflict aside. And again, when we're looking at the COVID crisis, and we have done a survey in 2021, where we have asked our respondents, the works councils, okay, how did collaboration between the works councils and the management at your establishment develop during the COVID crisis? So 18% said it has improved. The majority, 69%, said, well, it's remained almost the same, and only 12% have indicated that this collaboration has deteriorated. So again, the same pattern, even at the COVID crisis. When you have a crisis, key actors at the establishment level remind themselves that it's good and pays off for everybody to work together. And now we move to top-down stabilization. Something miraculously happened last year at the European level. The European Commission passed the minimum wage directive. With a major element, it provides standards national states have to apply when they have their own minimum wage laws. There is another provision there which is remarkable. And if you have asked anybody 2 years ago, all observers had said, no way this happens. It did happen. It means that the European legislator requires or suggests to national governments that they keep collective bargaining coverage at 80% minimum. And if they don't do so, they ask national governments to submit measures, strategies to increase bargaining coverage. So it's the first time ever that the European Union positively interferes with collective bargaining, asking member states to stabilize it. It still remains to be seen what it means when this system, it's so new, it hasn't been applied yet, but when it gets rolling. Second, of course, there are demands, the story I just told you, remember the European chart, that even in Germany we could ease the standard, make it easier to extend collective bargaining to other establishments within the economy. We have procurement laws. This is a debate, and we already have them at state level. Then when the state, the government, buys things, has contracts, they require bargaining coverage and obeying basic labor standards as a condition to get the contract. It's now written in the coalition agreement of the current government in Germany to have that at federal level as well, which basically means billions and billions of euros are covered by that provisions, and this money is going to be spent to companies which don't have to be covered by collective agreement but pay according to the standards. Okay. A funny thing which is recently happened due to the Ukraine crisis, when energy prices going up as doing electricity prices, there are some public calls for subsidizing it because the German industry is suffering and losing market share, and they said we need to subsidize the energies. And so the IG Metall Metal Workers Union has suggested a promise that, okay, you might want to do it, although we are not completely happy with it. However, if you subsidize energy, only if those companies guarantee collective bargaining coverage. So that's the most recent innovation. And also we have a reform bill which seeks to fill some worker voice gaps in the Works Constitution Act. Finally, stabilizing from bottom up. We have some strategies you're probably perfectly familiar with in Australia, basically membership organizing, which is not a long tradition in Germany, because membership organizing in Germany is mostly done by works councils at the establishment level. So we have a three-step procedure through which unions organize. They first seek to elect a works council in an establishment which doesn't have one, and they don't have members, they don't have a works council, so they make sure that there will be a works council first. Then they seek to organize the member of the works councils as well as a critical mass among the workforce within the union, and then approach the employer to enter negotiations for a collective agreement, which is the final and third step. We have some high-profile uphill battle cases recently for such a three-step procedure. We have it in wind energy. We have it with Amazon, which has agreed to have works councils or don't fight against them. However, they still don't have a collective agreement. YouTube, which is an interesting case, the IG Metall, the metal workers union, approached the YouTubers union. So content providers on the YouTube channels trying to help them getting a fair price for their products and their content. And finally, Tesla, which built a gigafactory close to Berlin. The IG Metall was successful to initiate the election of the works councils, however, still no collective agreement. And it remains to be seen whether they get Elon Musk actually to agree to a collective agreement. It will be a huge conflict, I assume. So we have a second approach, which is more German-like and based on Olsen's concepts, basically, of avoiding free riding and providing for collective goods. The first issue in this tradition is tax deduction for union subscriptions. Basically, they are only partially tax deductible right now, and it's high on the union's agenda to say, okay, we want more of that. An interesting and highly controversial issue is the exclusions of union outsiders from the benefits of collective agreements. Free riders, if you want to put it bluntly in the words of Manser Olsen, right? It's controversial because unions feel, well, we might lose members by this strategy if we tell all the other we don't feel responsible to fight for your interests, right? And so we still arguments are going still back and forth. And finally, this is a crazy thing that we have some provisions in German law which allow to deviate from labor and employment law standards to worsen the conditions of workers. They deviate in the case a union agrees to it in a collective agreement. For example, in some areas of the working time law, we have that once the union signs off on this in a collective agreement, employer is free to deviate from minimum standards in the statute. This is highly controversial, as you might imagine, because why would you tell workers that their standards are worsened because their union negotiates agreement? Yeah, but remains to be seen where this story goes. I conclude. Final slide. Okay, at the European level, it's highly dynamic. It's highly dynamic, and it remains to be seen whether these new 80% quorum will change things and helps to stabilize it. I'm not quite sure yet. Secondly, the German union movement is highly divided on several strategies and the direction of state involvement. And if you want to learn more of it, please allow me this brief sales pitch. And you may have published a piece on that in the British Journal of Industrial Relations. Thirdly, some scholars argue that in a comparative perspective, strong institutions inhibit the mobilization of unions. Because they lose their sense of urgency for campaigns. For example, there is a literature in the case of unions dealing with migrant members, right, who argues in that direction, saying, well, the highly institutionalized countries don't take in migrant workers because they don't have to. You have strong institutions, right? I think this is a dangerous misconception of what institutions do, and this is what I want to close in. And what I would suggest is To be smart, unions must combine all three approaches at a time. They have to strengthen the institutions from within by really improving collaboration at the establishment levels with employers for the benefit of workers. They need to do more membership organizing and building up strength from below, but also it can't be done with some state support. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, in closing, Martin, let's again sort of remember Joe in honour. This lecture is named a great friend, colleague, mentor, and intellectual leader for us both. So thank you for honouring us and him tonight, and a small token of appreciation for your lecture. So thanks very much. Can we please thank Martin again?
Thank you so much.